All right, we are set for the next session. I'm very happy to welcome you back here in the audience. And we are heading into a panel discussion. And there are some exciting developments, technology-wise, that make us talk today about the human factor of BPM and how far certain technologies that are emerging are challenging this human factor that we're having in BPM classically involved. I'm very happy that we have 4 experts here as panelists, and I want to briefly introduce you to these people. Next to myself, there's Hajo Reyers. He received a PhD from Technical University of Eindhoven and is now a full professor at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. Welcome, Hajo. Next to Hajo, we have Gero Decker. He received a PhD degree from HPI in Potsdam, and from this work, he went into practice and founded with others Signavio. Very happy to have you here, Gero. Next to Gero, we have Ingo Weber. He received a PhD degree from Karlsruhe, and after working with SAP, he moved over to Australia to join CSIRO, which some of you might know with the old name called NICTA. And we have, at the very end, Rick Hull with us. He received a PhD from University of California in Berkeley. Worked for quite some time with Bell Labs, which has now a different name, and he is now with IBM Research. So, let me kind of set a little bit the scene of what we are going to talk about. So, one thing that is important when we talk about processes is to recognize that many of the things that we're trying to address and challenge is that processes are inherently those complicated matters because there's division of labor in bigger organizations. So that means much of the work that needs to be done is being split up in smaller pieces, and there are different persons and different parties and different companies being involved with separate of these tasks. And we need to coordinate them in order to integrate the fractal results of these pieces of work. And many of the developments that we see recently have a certain impact either on the way how certain tasks are being performed in an enterprise setting or the way how these tasks are coordinated. To mention just 2 examples, there are technologies that build on artificial intelligence and machine learning. Robotic process automation is one of the terms in this context. And these are training techniques such that tasks can be automated and humans are kind of replaced with IT-based robots to do their pieces of work. On the other hand, there are developments in terms of coordination. Blockchain is one of the technologies that facilitates coordination between different parties. And this also raises the question if we don't pick up the phone anymore, or if we have infrastructures like blockchain-based Ethereum, for instance, to take care of this coordination. So, and one of the things that is being raised in this context is the question, how does that generally impact work? Somewhat like in a smaller process level, but also on a greater scale, in terms of how is that affecting society? And one of the challenging questions is, do we run out of work? I want to just briefly read out a small piece that I just recently found quite interesting to reflect upon. And I just quote verbatim. So that is a piece from the American Documentation Institute, and they write the following. They say there's a sizable fraction of workers which is unable to adapt to a new or different industry. Recognizing that this type of unemployment is a chronic effect of science and technology advance, may lead not merely to retraining programs in rapidly evolving fields, but also a new attitude towards education, which sounds very nice when we think of ourselves as being those guys in research and teaching that promoting education. One of the interesting things, and I would want to use this to hand over to Hajo, is that this quote is from the mid-60s, so it's not very recent. And I would like to invite now the different panelists to make their entry statements such that they can share with you their general observations around these different topics. And then I would invite you to bringing your comments and ideas and questions so that we can discuss this topic in a broader audience. So how are you? Do we run out of work?
Well, it wouldn't be so bad from some perspectives, of course, but I understand that your question is, of course, a question that is, I think, in the minds of many people, economists and other people, and I think there's also a genuine fear about the effects that automation has on the work that people do, and indeed, there have been incredible changes over the recent past. My position, however, is that fear for running out of jobs is heavily exaggerated. And I think one of the key elements to understand how this impact works is that there should be a distinction between jobs that people do and the tasks that these jobs are composed of. Any job is composed of multiple tasks, and what we see over the past decades is actually that automation, all kinds of algorithmic approaches, what they do is that they target one particular type of task, which is often part of wider jobs that people have. And these tasks are what you can refer to as routine tasks, tasks which there's a certain procedure behind it, there's a sort of repetition, a sort of a structure that can be unveiled, can be discovered, and that can be translated into an algorithmic approach. And these tasks clearly can be aimed at, can be targeted with automatic approaches. But by the way, these kind of routine tasks are not always, I would say, the cheapest tasks in the jobs that people do. There may be other things manually that require manual skills, but these routine tasks are, I would say, at a enormous rate being automated in all kinds of areas, and if it economically pays off, this will continue. Now, what I find interesting is that when you look in different areas in different studies, is that when you look at the automation effects of the routine component in something that is bigger, that it's not so much that the overall system or the overall process is being reduced, but specific parts of it. And more than that, the overall value of the system or the job that this task is part of is actually enhanced. So let me give you an example there. I read an interesting study about the use of the introduction and the use of ATMs in the United States. ATMs were introduced in the 70s, and in a study that looked at the replacement effect of ATMs on tellers, people who would be working at banks and would actually hand over money to people who visited these banks, you could clearly see that this element of the job of these tellers, these human tellers, was of course being replaced, was automated with these ATMs. And these ATMs, I think the use and the introduction of, the presence of these systems in the 90s approximately quadrupled. But what happened is that these people who previously did this part, handing over money to clients, that this kind of job did not diminish. It actually increased over in this same time period. And there were two factors behind it. One of them was that because the overall job became more, it became more economical to hand over work in an automated way, there were also opportunities for banks to open more branches. So there was actually a need for more personnel, and also personnel who were previously working as tellers. But more importantly, these tellers had other tasks that they would do. They would explain, the human tellers, they would explain to clients what the other bank products were, for example, and they would introduce their clients to these bank products and would also do, I would say, minor sales elements. And these parts of their job were actually enhanced through the automation of, I would say, the more routine part of their work. So instead of a decline, you would see an increase there. It was a small increase, and to be honest, the number of tellers as part of the labor population has decreased over time, but in absolute numbers, this went up. And this is actually a part of a sort of a of a wider phenomenon, which is sometimes referred to as the O-ring theory, that if you have any type of system or that is composed of different parts, and the overall system would stop working when one of these parts fails, that by improving one part, that actually the value of the overall system enhances and doesn't diminish. And you can see this also in processes, in business processes, where if you enhance a certain task in a process, the overall process becomes more valuable, and it becomes also more important that the other tasks in this business process are executed well or with a high quality. So, having said all this, this explains my statement that it's not so much that jobs will go away. Jobs will be affected, heavily affected by automation, and keep being affected, especially jobs which, of course, contain to a large extent routine tasks will be heavily affected. But I think the fear that these jobs will completely disappear, those fears are exaggerated.
Thank you very much, Hajo. So we're talking about these. Can you switch it? So we're talking about these repetitive tasks. So they seem to be the key to understand what is going to happen in this regard with these new technologies. I want to hand over to Gero because he's not only the co-founder of Signavio, he has also some expertise being involved with a company that's called Parlermind. And there are some scenarios more concretely visible about what we have talked about. So Gero, maybe you can share some of your experiences in this context.
Sure. I mean, I'm an engineer by heart, so I love technology and I love, experimenting what's possible and push the boundaries. So, overall, I'm excited about all of the things that are available now. And how it could affect things. But on the other hand, being an entrepreneur and bring things to market and having to convince people that they actually have to pay money for using that type of stuff, that gives you sometimes a reality check of what's actually needed and what is viable in the marketplace. So talking about AI in particular, I mean, conceptually, theoretically, it can do so many things and is an exciting thought exercise to have, self-optimizing, self-learning machines that can do all kinds of things that humans did before. The question is, when you want to bring that to market and make that work, what are the economics behind that, and when does it actually work, and when doesn't it work? Parlermind is an interesting example. It's a company that I invested in very, very early, and what they do is they automate customer service request emails or customer service requests. They specialize on e-commerce only at the moment. So you order something at Amazon or you order something at Zalando or whatever the e-commerce company is that you're working with. You have questions like, where's my package? Next Monday is the birthday of my girlfriend. I'm waiting desperately. What can I do to speed this up? Or, I ordered the wrong thing. I want to cancel it. Or the thing that arrived is the wrong thing, right? I want to exchange it. How does it work? So, and it's interesting because this seems to be a very repeatable, very replicable scenario, so that it's very easy to build an AI, a self-optimizing machine that responds to these kinds of requests. Because it's one domain, you have a high volume of requests that you can learn from, and it's actually something that is replicable over companies, right? So it's not specific to one company, but it's replicable to, let's say, 10,000s of online shops out there. And with that type of scenario, you can build a machine that understands the sentiment of the email. So for example, this person is angry, or this person is happy, or there's some urgency in there, or here it's about consolidating someone. So the whole sentiment piece of it, but also what's the semantic of what's the action to be taken, right? So for example, I don't know, next Monday is the birthday. I understand that it's super important to you. We'll make sure everything to make your girlfriend happy. And this will be a robot saying that, right? So it's not a human, but a robot saying that. And saying, well, we can offer you, €10 more for overnight shipping to make that work. And the likelihood we've seen in the past is that, in the area that you work in, that, that you should be fine. But in other areas, I've seen a lot of attempts of applying AI to those domains, and it has been super complicated and super hard, and not returning the investment that you have to make. Why? Because it's super specific to the particular use case. The training data that you need is specific to one company or to one special task at hand, and you simply don't get the economies of scale to make that work at a reasonable price. So to give you one example, a friend of mine, he has a company called Blue Yonder. They specialize in dynamic pricing. So what Amazon introduced, every person at every moment in time gets a personalized price, right? And you optimize on certain criteria, like, for example, getting rid of your stock until a certain date and reaching the maximum price until then. And what they found was that AI technology, machine learning technology, works great if you have more than $1 billion in revenue with your company. If you have less than $1 billion in revenue for your retailer, the machine learning is simply not powerful enough, and it's much smarter to have people sitting there building all kinds of rules and decision models for pricing and campaigns and tailoring the price to a specific person, because you simply don't reach the scale for machine learning technology to make sense. So long story short, great technology, but I think we're still early in the game to find out where's the viability of those things, and where can we make it work, not only conceptually, theoretically, but also economically to return the investment that you want to have in business. If that investment is not returned, people will still do things, for a long time to come.
Thank you very much, Gero. I want to turn to Rick with this observation that you make, so that many things are much more complicated. The data is versatile, and Rick has this strong expertise in data management that he accumulated through the last decades. And Rick, I would like to ask you to comment a little bit about how has the scene changed in terms of how we work with data in order to make all these scenarios work in the last couple of years. How do you look at that?
Okay, thank you. I want to mention 3 areas where data is really central to how the BPM world is changing, both because of AI and because of blockchain. And the first thing I want to hit on, and it's kind of related to what we were just listening to, is data entry. So much of business process comes down to getting data into the system. Maybe at the beginning to launch a process, or maybe in the middle because more data is needed, and et cetera. And it's really kind of a curse of our existence, I would say. And I think it's going to be a curse of our existence for quite a while. Just one example in back office processing for human resources, for hiring, terminating, promotions, et cetera. Turns out that about 60% of the labor today is focused on data validations. Data comes in, it's somehow wrong, it has to be fixed, it's a major pain. Now, how is AI helping in that? It's through the conversational front ends. It's through, instead of forcing people to work with kind of menu-based situations or putting in through forms that are handwritten, conversational front ends that are given to us by natural language understanding, natural language generation, and kind of machine learning to figure out how conversations should be going, allow the data entry to be more natural, more intuitive, easier, faster to go in. But at the same time, as just mentioned, the target for those conversational front ends is still can be a very heterogeneous environment. So even though the conversational front end is kind of simplifying, if you say, oh, well, not only do I want to put data in, but I want to make sure that it's consistent with the other data that may be in my environment, that can be a challenge, because that data may be spread across multiple silos and et cetera. So there's still this challenge of data integration. Okay, now the second thing I want to get at is blockchain. Okay, so what's interesting is, I think that in the room, of course, everybody's heard of blockchain, but probably half of you have kind of been reading up on blockchain and understand where it's going. I think for others that I've talked to, it's still kind of an unknown, oh yes, maybe I should start looking at it. The thing about blockchain is it does represent a disruptive moment for business process, or at least for some large portion of business processes. And that's because blockchain enables sharing multiple organizations that are trying to do business processes to have a single shared repository of data, a single ledger, if you will, okay? And it's got the encryption and consensus and this and that, so that even though it's a single shared thing, people are able to trust it, the different organizations are able to trust it, and it has privacy guarantees built in, so that maybe I'm working with Ingo on something, but then Jairo won't be able to see it if I don't want him to see it. So it provides this basis. Because of the underlying technology, it provides a new way of enabling a shared repository. So this, first off, this is very different than today's approach to having multiple companies work together, where each company has its own silo of information. This totally streamlines or gets rid of the friction of data inconsistencies in many ways, okay? Instead of having, my copy of data and Ingo's copy of data, we have one copy of the data. As the data goes in, we can be checking whether it's consistent with other data that's already in there. Okay, now what are the implications of this shared repository? First off, it's going to, change the way a lot of business process deals with crossing silos within an organization or crossing boundaries between companies. That friction is going away. It's going to lead to the development of shared data models, so the companies have to get together about what's the data schema of what they're representing, okay? So suddenly there's economic motivation for industries to arrive at standardized data models, okay? In essence, this is going to bring back the whole attempt of the semantic web community, right? The semantic web community was hoping that we'd come up with standardized ontologies for healthcare, for logistics, for finance and accounting, for HR, and et cetera. Because of blockchain, people will want to start sharing information against a common data model, and so these common data models will arise. Okay, now the third thing, and even though blockchain right now it's focused on across corporations, the same principles will start to pervade within organizations, so that if you have different silos within an organization, even those will start saying, oh, I want the benefits of a shared data model. Oh, I can use blockchain as that basis for the shared data model. Now, the third thing I want to hit on is, as the data becomes more kind of uniform, more standardized, this actually will be an enabler for a shift in business process management from a process-centric or a data-centric perspective towards a goal-centric perspective. And so this will be an opportunity for people, instead of saying, oh, I need to put this data in and I want this task to happen, et cetera, they'll be able to say, this is my goal. And the goal can be expressed in the vocabulary of the shared data model. Okay? And so now this will enable the emergence then, the application of planning technologies from AI against processes as we know it. Okay, so just to summarize, I'm trying to get at three mechanisms where blockchain and AI are going to be transforming how we do business process. It'll create a lot of employment for us, the research community, because there's a lot of details to be worked out. And as the first panelist was saying, it will be transitioning the kinds of jobs that people do, but it'll be allowing more people to think about kind of goals and the business values and the objectives that they're trying to reach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So you mentioned blockchain, and I'm looking at Ingo now because he's kind of the mastermind between the blockchain activities in CSIRO. And Ingo, you guys in Australia are working on various scenarios, and as Rick said, the concept is quite abstract for many people, and maybe you can illustrate some of the applications that you've been working on and your perception of what this technology is going to bring.
Thank you, Jan. Maybe that was a little bit too much honor. So I want to do exactly that, but before I do, I just want to briefly take a step back and look at the premise of the question for the panel, which is, will machines eat the human factor in BPM? Now, there are two premises in there. One is that basically all human touch is good, and two, that people will mind if their tasks are automated. And as Hayo was referring to these routine tasks, I think there are a lot of tasks that some of us have to do where we wouldn't really mind those tasks being automated, and that will lead to this transformation. Also, in terms of all human touch is good, in these routine tasks, quite often we find ourselves in a situation where the best performance a human can achieve is not stuffing up. And it's not necessarily a bad thing if this work is transformed. Also, of course, the ethics of humans making decisions or the way they perform tasks are not always perfect. You have things like corruption or bias. And I think things like corruption we can probably reduce by automating tasks. For example, if we take customs processes in developing countries, in some countries there's a lot of corruption. You have to bribe the right people to get your goods through customs on time. Reducing that is probably a pretty good thing, at least for the general society, probably not so much for the customs agent, customs official. But when it comes to the ethics, we also have to consider the ethics of the AI, because if you have a bias in the data from which you learn, you can learn unethical decisions and can automate them in a way that they always be made in this unethical way. A different question also is, from this broader perspective, is if people lose their jobs, right, then we have to also reconsider that wealth distribution and purpose in life to a large degree for many people are associated with work, and that I think is a challenge to society as a whole, which we probably won't be solving in the BPM community or on this panel today. But now coming back to your actual question, so blockchain opportunities and scenarios, right? So blockchain, I think, has two primary features that are great in this regard. One is that they enable interorganizational processes, collaborative processes in a different way. They enable potentially more complex supply chains, for one example. They might make it easier for Fijian producers to export their goods to Australia, which can be very positive. This is topics like these we are working on. There is a startup company in Australia, AgriDigital, with whom we interact quite a bit, and they want to reduce the